My parents forced me to drop out so my brother could study abroad. Now I own the company he begged to work at, but I said, no, I'm a 25-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the forgotten son in my own family. My older brother, Daniel, was always the star, the one who could do no wrong. If he got a B, it was good effort. If I got an A, it was why not an A+. I used to think that if I just worked harder, they'd finally see me. I wanted to study business, to build something of my own, to make them proud in a way that didn't require me to be Daniel. When I got accepted into college, it felt like the universe was finally giving me that chance. I remember walking home with the acceptance letter, holding it like it was a key to a new life. My mom was cooking, my dad was watching TV, and Daniel was on his phone, pretending not to notice me. I told them the news, expecting just once a moment of shared excitement. Instead, my dad said, "We need to talk tonight." That night, they called me into the living room. The lights were dim, and Daniel sat there like he already knew what was coming. My mom's voice was calm but distant. "We can only afford one tuition this year," she said. "And your brother's already been accepted abroad," my dad added. "You're younger, you'll get your turn." I remember staring at them, numb, as they explained how they'd used my savings account, the one I built from part-time jobs, to help pay for Daniel's admission fees. My brother didn't even look sorry. He just smirked and said, "You'll understand one day." That night, I sat alone in my room, the acceptance letter crumpled in my hands, realizing that dreams don't die quietly. They're strangled by the people who claim to love you most, and that was the night. I stopped believing I mattered in my family when I dropped out. It didn't happen with any big announcement, just silence. My friends texted at first, asking why I wasn't in class, if I'd transferred somewhere else. I lied and said it was a gap year. Eventually the messages stopped. Professors stopped emailing too. It was like I'd disappeared from a life I was supposed to live. My parents told me to be understanding. Daniel's degree abroad was an investment in our family's future. My father said, "When he makes it big, we all win." My mother added, "You'll get your turn someday." But that someday never came. I became the invisible glue that kept the house running, paying bills, fixing things, helping out while my brother sent selfies from fancy cafes overseas to survive. I worked wherever I could, loading trucks in a warehouse, delivering food at night, cleaning offices before dawn. My body ached, my mind burned, but I told myself it was temporary. Still, every time I scrolled through social media and saw Daniel laughing with new friends, traveling across Europe, posing with champagne glasses, I felt something sharp twist inside me. One night after a 12-hour shift, I came home to find my parents bragging on the phone to relatives about how proud they were of Daniel's international success. My mom looked at me and whispered, "Don't look so bitter. It's his turn to shine." I went to my room and shut the door quietly. My hands were blistered from carrying boxes, my eyes red from exhaustion. But none of that hurt as much as realizing they saw my struggle as normal, like I was built for sacrifice. That night, I promised myself something. I didn't know how or when, but one day, I'd make sure Daniel's success wouldn't be the only story my family told. A few months after I dropped out, I hit a wall mentally, emotionally, physically. I was running on burnt-out fumes, dragging myself through night shifts and living off cheap instant noodles. My life had shrunk to a cycle of work, sleep, and numbness. I stopped expecting anything better. But then, something unexpected happened. Got a job at a small supply shop near the industrial district, owned by a quiet old man named Mr. Harlan. He interviewed me in the back room, surrounded by dusty shelves and stacks of ledgers. Instead of asking about degrees or experience, he looked me in the eye and said, "You willing to learn and show up every day?" I nodded. That was enough for him. Harlan wasn't flashy. He wore the same worn-out cardigan every day and used a flip phone. But he knew business, not the corporate kind, real business. He taught me how to read people, how to track margins, when to trust your gut over spreadsheets. I watched how he spoke to customers, calm, respectful, never in a rush. He didn't just sell products. He built trust. After work, I started watching YouTube lectures and free online business courses. I'd sit in my small room with a secondhand laptop, scribbling notes on supply chains, marketing psychology, and small business case studies. I couldn't afford tuition, but I could afford Wi-Fi, and that became my classroom at first. It was just something to keep my mind occupied. But slowly, something started to shift. I found myself looking forward to work not just for the paycheck, but to understand. I started asking Harlan questions, suggesting changes, testing what I was learning. For the first time since losing everything, I felt purpose. And though I didn't know it yet, that tiny, cluttered store would become the place where I rebuilt the future they stole from me. Working at Harlan's shop became my sanctuary. Every morning I'd open the shutters, sweep the floor, and greet the regulars like I owned the place. Harlan started trusting me with more managing inventory, negotiating with vendors, even setting prices. When he let me reorganize the entire supply tracking system using a spreadsheet I made from scratch, it felt like I was finally building something. I'd stay late after closing, crunching numbers, tweaking displays, studying which products moved fastest and why. I started noticing patterns, customer habits, missed opportunities. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was becoming obsessed one night. After we had a slow day, I hesitated before speaking. Mr. Harlan, we could try bundling the items that don't sell, or offering discounts to returning customers. He looked at me over his glasses and nodded slowly. You're not just a worker, son. You're thinking like an owner. That one sentence lit a fire under me. I started treating every shift like a test, every customer like a case study. I tracked numbers, experimented with layout designs, rewrote product descriptions on tags. Harlan gave me space to try, even when some ideas flopped. Meanwhile, I kept studying. Marketing, pricing psychology, startup case studies. I'd listen to business podcasts while cleaning, watch tutorials while eating, dream about what my store would look like one day. The more I learned, the clearer it became. I didn't need a fancy degree. I needed opportunity. And while my parents still acted like I was wasting time at some little shop, I knew better. I was sharpening my mind, learning what they could never teach in classrooms. They gave Daniel the spotlight, but I was building my own, stage brick by brick, lesson by lesson, and soon I'd be ready to step into the light they never offered me. After almost a year at the shop, things were finally steady. I had a rhythm work during the day, study at night, save whatever I could. I wasn't rich, but I had purpose. I had momentum. I even started sketching out ideas for a tech supply business one that blended Harlan's values with a modern model. I didn't tell anyone, not even Harlan. It felt too fragile to share just yet. Then came the dinner. My mom called, saying Daniel was coming back home for a few weeks during his semester break. She wanted the whole family to sit down together. I knew what that meant, another celebration of his greatness. But I went anyway, telling myself to be civil. When I walked in, Daniel was already there, holding court like always. He hugged me half-heartedly and said, "Still working at that little corner store?" I forced a smile. My dad was grilling steaks. My mom was glowing with pride. And Daniel spent the night talking about networking mixers, future plans, and how his professors said he had CEO potential. At one point, I casually mentioned I'd been saving to start something of my own. Daniel laughed. "Come on, man. You're good with boxes and inventory, not strategy. Be realistic." My parents didn't defend me. My mom just said, "Sweetie, you should probably aim for something stable. Daniel leads you support." That was the moment it all clicked. They hadn't just chosen Daniel over me back then. They never stopped choosing him. I left before dessert. Remember walking out into the cold night air, the sky pitch black, my breath sharp in my throat. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel defeated. I felt clear. They could laugh. They could doubt. They had just handed me one thing I never had before, permission to stop seeking their approval. A few months after that dinner, I noticed Harlan moving slower than usual. He brushed it off. Just old bones. He said, but he started taking more breaks, forgetting things he never used to. One afternoon, I found him sitting on a crate in the back room, clutching his chest. I called an ambulance before he could protest. He came back from the hospital quieter, more tired. Shop stayed open, but something had shifted. He started leaving earlier, telling me to lock up. One evening, as he handed me the keys, he looked at me and said, "If anything happens to me, don't let this place rot. Keep it breathing." I just nodded, trying to ignore the weight in his voice. Then, just like that, he was gone. A stroke took him in his sleep. I stood at the back of the funeral, unsure where I fit in among his relatives and old customers. When it ended, his widow, a gentle woman named May, walked up to me. Her eyes were red but steady. She handed me a thick envelope. "Harlan wanted you to have this," she said. "We're more than an employee. You were family." Sighed. Was a letter in his shaky handwriting, and at the bottom a legal document. He'd left me the business. Not just the name or the shelves, everything. The keys, the license, client list. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the paper like it was written in a language I didn't deserve to understand. That night, I sat in the store alone. No music, no lights, just me, surrounded by everything he'd trusted me to carry forward. I wasn't just rebuilding my life anymore. I was holding someone else's legacy. I swore I wouldn't let it die. Not after everything, not after him. Owning the shop changed everything. For the first time in my life, I had control, real control. Poured myself into the business, working 12, sometimes 16 hours a day. I updated the website, added online ordering, expanded our stock with better vendors I'd been researching for months. I started reaching out to small tech startups, offering bulk deals on equipment. The shop, once quiet and dusty, was buzzing. Orders doubled, then tripled. I hired 2 part-time assistants, kids like me, overlooked, underestimated. I taught them what Harlan taught me. One of them, Malik, told me, "You actually listen. You don't treat us like extras in someone else's movie." That hit me, because for the first time I wasn't an extra either. But of course, my parents didn't see any of it. When I stopped by the house one evening to drop off a few groceries just trying to keep peace, my father asked, "So, are you still doing that?" Little thing. I stared at him. I wanted to say it's not a thing, it's a company. It's mine. But I just nodded and left. Even when I sent them a business card with my name, founder and director, they just smiled like it was a cute hobby. My mom even said, "Well, when Daniel gets back, maybe he can help you turn it into something real." They still believed I was just playing pretend, that everything I'd built was temporary until Daniel came back and showed me how it's really done. But that doubt didn't break me. It sharpened me. I didn't need their belief. I had clients. I had growth. I had impact. Let them ignore me. Let them wait for Daniel's next big move, because what they didn't know was that my next big move would change everything. It started with a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was shaky, unusually soft. "Daniel's coming home. He lost his job. Can you come by soon?" I sat in my office, with my name on the glass, door staring at the phone. For a moment, I didn't know what I felt. Relief, pity, a flicker of cruel satisfaction. All I knew was this: the pedestal had finally cracked. Daniel returned 2 weeks later. I expected him to walk in like always, loud, confident, full of stories. But when I showed up to visit, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight. The bags under his eyes looked permanent. No job, no backup plan. Apparently, his company had downsized and his visa was revoked. He didn't even have enough savings to pay rent. At dinner, the roles reversed. My parents hovered around him with worry, but there was something different in their tone, desperation. My dad kept glancing at me. My mom finally asked, "Could you maybe talk to your contacts? Help him find something?" I didn't answer, not immediately. I just looked at Daniel as he sat there picking at his food, not meeting my eyes. This was the same man who laughed at my dreams, who told me I'd never build anything worthwhile. Later that night, Daniel approached me outside. We stood by the gate in silence until he finally said, "I know we haven't always gotten along, but if you hear of any openings, I'd appreciate it." It wasn't a plea, not quite. But it wasn't arrogance either. It was the first time I'd ever heard him sound uncertain. I nodded. Just once. but I didn't promise anything because something had shifted. The balance was tilting, and for the first time, he needed me. 2 weeks passed. I didn't reach out to Daniel, not out of spite at least. That's what I told myself. But because I wanted to see what he'd do on his own. I figured he'd pull some strings, call old professors, find another cushy opportunity. That was his pattern fall, then land in someone else's arms. But then, Malik, my assistant, walked into my office holding a stack of applications. "Hey," he said, flipping through them. One of these caught my eye. Pretty decent resume. Guy studied abroad, marketing degree, some work experience. Name's Daniel. I froze, took the paper from him, and there it was. My brother's name, his email, his awkwardly tailored cover letter. He had applied to my company without even realizing who ran it. I sat there staring at it for a full minute. 100 memories hit me at once, him laughing when I said I wanted to start a business. Him smirking as our parents told me I had to drop out. Him sipping wine in Europe while I was packing boxes and bleeding through night shifts. And now he was asking for a job. I scheduled the interview for the next morning. I didn't tell him who would be conducting it. When he walked into the conference room, he looked confident, clean, shirt, printed CV, even wore a blazer. But the second he saw me sitting at the head of the table, his entire expression cracked. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "Please," I said. "Ah! Let's keep this professional." The room went silent. The power shift was complete, and for the first time in my life, I watched Daniel sit across from my insurer, unsteady and completely out of control. And I wasn't done. Daniel didn't even make it through the interview. 10 minutes in, he stammered through a vague answer about team leadership, then went silent. I watched him squirm, waiting for the usual arrogance to kick in, but it never did. His shoulders slouched, his voice cracked. He looked small. I stood up, closed his file slowly, and said, "I think we're done here." He didn't argue, just stared at the table like it might swallow him. Later that night, the calls started. My mom, first tearful, dramatic. "How could you humiliate your brother like that? He came to you for help." I kept my voice calm. He applied. I treated him like any other applicant. Then came my father, angrier. "You're acting out of spite. He's family. This isn't how we treat each other." I actually laughed and said, "You mean the way you treated me when you took my college fund? When you made me drop out so Daniel could shine?" Silence. For the first time, they were the ones on the back foot. They had no answer. I let it all out. Years of being dismissed, overlooked, used. I told them about the night I cried over my acceptance letter, how they stole my future and handed it to Daniel with a bow. And now they expected me to lift him up again? No, I told them he wasn't hired. He wasn't owed. And I wasn't interested in being their backup plan anymore, my mother cried. My father hung up. But I sat in my living room, phone still buzzing, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. They had made their choices. And now I was making mine. Daniel had hit rock bottom, but I had finally climbed out of mine. Daniel didn't even make it through the interview. 10 minutes in, he stammered through a vague answer about team leadership, then went silent. I watched him squirm, waiting for the usual arrogance to kick in, but it never did. His shoulders slouched. His voice cracked. He looked small. I stood up, closed his file slowly, and said, "I think we're done here." He didn't argue. He just stared at the table like it might swallow him. Later that night, the call started. My mom first, tearful, dramatic. "How could you humiliate your brother like that? He came to you for help." I kept my voice calm. He applied. I treated him like any other applicant. Then came my father, angrier. "You're acting out of spite. He's family. This isn't how we treat each other." I actually laughed and said, "You mean the way you treated me when you took my college fund? Or when you made me drop out so Daniel could shine?" Silence. For the first time, they were the ones on the back foot. They had no answer. I let it all out. Years of being dismissed, overlooked, used. I told them about the night I cried over my acceptance letter, how they stole my future and handed it to Daniel with a bow, and now they expected me to lift him up again. No, I told them he wasn't hired. He wasn't owed. And I wasn't interested in being their backup plan anymore, my mother cried. My father hung up, but I sat in my living room, phone still buzzing, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. They had made their choices, and now I was making mine. Daniel had hit rock bottom, but I had finally climbed out of mine. A few weeks later, I found myself parked outside my parents' house. I hadn't planned it. I was just driving through the old neighborhood after a late meeting and turned onto their street out of habit. The porch light was on. The windows glowed warm like they used to when I was a kid. For a brief second, I imagined going up, knocking on the door, sitting down at that kitchen table one last time, maybe hearing my mom say she was sorry. Maybe hearing my dad admit they were wrong, but I knew better. That house wasn't a home anymore, not to me. It was just a monument to everything I wasn't allowed to become until I walked away from it. So I sat there quietly, engine running, watching shadows move behind the curtains. I thought about how far I'd come from hauling boxes at midnight and eating instant noodles in a windowless room, to owning a growing company, leading a team, finally feeling like I was enough. Not because they said so, but because I proved it to myself. I'd spent most of my life trying to be chosen, trying to be seen. But in the end, I didn't need their validation. I needed distance. I needed clarity. Daniel made his choices. So did they. And I made mine. I pulled away from the curb and didn't look back. That night I got home, stood in my office, and looked at the plaque on my desk, founder and CEO. I whispered to myself, they chose him. But life chose me. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough.